All right, so everyone, we're really excited today to come back with a foil architecture chat and also this time an urban planning chat. And we're really excited to welcome Dana McKinney, who is an urban planner and architect at Gehry Associates, where she is very closely working on a large-scale project for Los Angeles, and she's working on the LA River Master Plan, and that's one of the projects we'll be talking about today. Dana has studied architecture at the best schools of the country. She attended Princeton for undergrad and got a double master's from the Harvard Graduate School of Design in architecture and urban planning. And she was also one of the creators of the Black in Design conference that started at Harvard. So we're really excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. So I guess I should just start by introducing myself a little bit more. I guess, yeah, Dana McKinney, and I've been living in LA now for the last 3 years, where I'm an architect and planner at Gehry Partners. I just wanted to share with you guys some of the work that I'm doing specifically on homelessness along the LA River, which I can explain more. I'm going to share some slides with you guys, so just give me a second. Okay. Let's see if it works.
We can see it.
Okay, let me see if I can get this full screen mode. Yep. Okay, so I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with LA specifically and the LA River, but the LA River is a flood control project within the city and within the county. At its narrowest, it's about 50 feet wide in Canoga Park, which is the headwaters, and at the mouth of the river in Long Beach, it's about 600 feet wide. The shape of the channel really varies between a box channel to a more naturalized condition, and then the trapezoid is kind of the more common shape. The channel actually spans 51 miles, so it's very long, and it goes through 17 different cities. The reason why we always mention the number of cities that are in the project is because it means that we're dealing with all these different municipalities, and the city of LA, which is massive in comparison to some of the smaller cities like Cudahy or Bell, which might only be 3 square miles. As a result of this, we have to talk to all these different municipalities. We also have to deal with 2 different jurisdictions of the channel itself. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has about 20 miles, and then the LA County Public Works has the other 31 miles. And then the city of LA actually has an overlay district, which causes a whole other layer of complications. The reason why our office, in conjunction with Lori Olin and Geosyntec, which is a hydraulic engineering firm, has started to work on this project was because in 2017, there was a major study done by the U.S. Army Corps that found out that the channel isn't exactly to the capacity that it's supposed to be. So in these red sections, this part of the channel is only really rated for about an 11 or 10-year storm. So every 10 years, the channel is going to overflow. This is what it looks like when it overflows. And so the areas that are kind of in the turquoise are getting 3 to 5 feet of water. So those houses in those neighborhoods are going to be completely damaged.
Are you seeing the slides?
I'm only seeing the cover slide right now.
Oh no, interesting.
So
are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay, that's weird. Okay. Can you see it now still?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize.
Okay.
So I'll just go back and show you quickly. So that's the countywide map showing the different municipalities, the channel capacity, the red being the areas that we're most concerned about, and orange somewhat concerned about, and then what the flooding would look like within the communities. And when the Army Corps of Engineers did their study, they only looked at about a 5-mile stretch of the river. So we're saying, okay, well, if you only did 5 miles and you found out that the channel is vastly under-serviced, then what about the other, 46 miles?
Right.
As we began to do this master planning process, we're now about in the 2nd year of this. We decided to not just focus on flood risk because we understood this as an opportunity to look at broader issues that are within the county. And so we have things like median household income, in which we start to overlay social demographics and understand where people have the greatest levels of vulnerabilities. The upper river tends to be a bit more middle income, tends to be whiter, and wealthier compared to the lower river, which tends to be predominantly Latinx, Black, a little bit of Asian, and lower income. This also then overlays a pretty strong relationship between public health and other factors of related factors. And a lot of this is also a consequence of the significant amount of highways that are within the Southeast community that are a connection to Long Beach, where the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles are located. We had a very robust community engagement process. We had about 20 meetings and about 13 community partnership meetings, where we had all these different people come together. We had over almost a million digital ad impressions, so through Facebook and Instagram. We did a telephone town hall. We held a youth summit downtown, and we just had a whole litany of different engagements within that. And as a result of all that work, we started to come up with a goal-driven framework. So we really tried to use data to understand what the community's needs were from across a different variety of spectrums, and then use that to create a series of goals and then the design mechanisms that would then layer on top of that. These are the 9 goals that we've established. They're quite wordy, but essentially they range from water needs, which would include water supply, water quality, flood risk. They include ecology, open space, parks, and they also look at more social factors such as arts, culture, education, affordable housing, and homelessness. And again, each of these different goals is backed up by a robust series of data sets. So we probably are working with 300 different data sets on a given day. And then each of these things probably have anywhere between 50 and 100 different data sets that are supporting them. Some of them overlay, of course. And the one I just want to share a little bit about is homelessness, which is a subset of goal 6, which is our affordable housing and homelessness goal. Mm-hmm. The reason why homelessness rose to the top of one of our 9 goals was because when we asked people during our community events and during the surveying process, what are the reasons why you don't visit the river? The number one reason, time and time and time again, was safety. And so, okay, well, what about safety? When we asked, we were prompted further, we asked, and then they said people experiencing homelessness along the river. This was not surprising. I think that there's a lot of cultural fear of people experiencing homelessness. Homelessness is very pervasive across LA County. But then they started to kind of strike our imaginations a little bit about what does it mean specifically for the people who are experiencing homelessness within the river itself or within the river's right of way. Our master plan actually looks at a mile on either side of the river. So it's 51 miles long and 2 miles wide. Well, 2 miles and 600 feet or 2 miles and 50 feet, depending on where you are. Mm-hmm. For the most part, actually, LA County just came out with its point in time homelessness count from this past January. So 66,400 people, a little bit more, that are experiencing homelessness across LA County. And this isn't even the complete picture of LA County because the city of Burbank, Glendale, and Long Beach all do their own count, and those counts haven't been released yet. So it's probably gonna be closer to about 70,000. And then within a mile of either side of the river, almost 9,000 people. And so this image is just kind of an example of what it looks like for somebody who's occupying the river as their home. It brings up lots of concerns for safety. When the river does flood, it floods fast and the water is moving. So every year in the city, almost undeniably, someone is killed in the LA River during a flood event because they're washed away and they drown. And a lot of the times it's people who are experiencing homelessness. Another concern is that the people who are occupying and living alongside the river are using it for sanitation purposes, which is a huge concern for their own health because the water actually, a lot of times, there's a lot of runoff. There's still factories that might be using it as an outpouring for their facility, so the water isn't clean. It's also been an issue in 2017 and 2018. There was a hepatitis B outbreak in LA County among its homeless population, and so the shared use of water was also not great for that. And in general, it's not good for the water quality for people to be using it, but as it goes into the beach. So it's just a litany of issues that we were considering. Within the homelessness goals, we have a series of mechanisms that we're working through and suggesting within the master plan. The one that's the most ongoing, kind of lowest hanging fruit would be outreach. And so there's an existing network of homelessness service providers. There's the LA County Homeless Service Authority, WASA, and other organizations that go in and can basically work to employ people and bring them to services and identify housing opportunities for them. Temporary sanitation facilities. There are an existing series of porta potties that the WASA and the county have actually put along the river, basically earmarked for the people experiencing homelessness, but they're very expensive to maintain, and they're not particularly nice environments. More permanent public hygiene facilities, which is kind of what I'm going to focus on a little bit more. Interim motel conversion, which is looking at actually temporarily converting a motel with a master lease anywhere from 10 to 15 years, and a homeless service provider would then come in and then operate their own programming and have residential facilities within the motel. Temporary supportive housing, it's typically someone would live in there for 3 to 4 months when they're exiting out of homelessness before they enter more permanent housing. And there's going to be like drug rehabilitation, there's going to be mental health services, other services are going to be on site. And then the best practice, and this is the thing that we're really hoping for, is permanent supportive housing. And that's basically, it's a permanent residence for the individual, but they have on-site management, on-site case services, and all the different social services right where they live. But the issue with this being that it takes a bit more time to actually acquire the land, develop the land, raise the money to build the thing, and move forward with that. And so I'm just going to focus really quickly on the public hygiene facilities. Along the river in general, we are recommending a series of pavilions, river pavilions, and they are in 3 different tiers. Tier 1 are just the A components, Tier 2 are A and B, and then Tier 3, A, B, and C. And the B and C are the ones that I'm going to focus on. They're the ones that have actual restrooms. So the reason why restrooms are important in general are people always have to go to the bathroom. No matter who you are, you have to pee. And currently when you're using the river, there aren't a lot of them. And the river being 51 miles and us trying to create a connected park infrastructure along the entire length of it, we don't want people to feel like they have to go home just to use the restroom. And then what you often see is that people who are cycling along the river are like just openly defecating because there's no restrooms in sight. So we want to make sure that there's a comfortable restroom environment for everybody. We're also looking at mothers' rooms and family restrooms. And then for the really the larger pavilions, having a locker room. The locker rooms we're imagining as having single room occupancy bathrooms, which we think are important for establishing a sense of dignity for the people who are using them. Having showers. So let's say this is a pavilion that's near soccer pitches and playgrounds. Some people want to have, like, they don't want to take their little stinky kids home, so they want to actually bring them and have the kid take a shower before they go home. But those showers can also be used for persons experiencing homelessness. The benefit of this model is that you can actually leverage county funding to help continuously maintain these facilities. And these facilities can also house first aid stations or food facilities. They can have public services. They also could have homelessness services on site, especially in high concentrated areas. And these are just kind of examples of the different configurations you can do. The larger Tier 3 gathering pavilions can really serve as cultural center or community centers along the river at large. And just a few examples of what these could look like. So this would be a rest or Tier 2. So this is just a simple toilet with a sink, but it may also have benches and lighting, water fountains, garbage cans, picnic tables, what it could look like when you envision it. And then the Tier 3 pavilion kind of being an aggregation of all these different programs, but also making sure you have this infrastructure, people who need to shower, who need to use the restroom, who might need to store things temporarily, what that might look like. And some of them we're actually looking at cantilevering over the river itself, and so that you are still able to respect portions of the river, acknowledging that it's there and leveraging that as a resource, but also seeing it as this stranded piece of resources for those communities who are inhabiting it every day. And this is just a map showing where we've actually gone through and individually identified locations for just the shade pavilions, but also looking at where rest and gathering pavilions are going to be. We're hoping that there's a shower no more than every 2 to 3 miles, and we're hoping that there's a bathroom no more than every half mile. And so there's a different cadence that we've established along the entire river, also acknowledging where there are a little bit of existing infrastructures as well as the ones that need to be improved. But understanding that it's important for everybody, regardless of your status in this country and in this along the river, to actually have a place for sanitation and services. And that's it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for going through this and giving us a, I guess, a snapshot that goes deeper and deeper into specific aspect of this master plan. I mean, it's incredible to me, Dana, that this is going to, this is a systematic level of intervention that's going to affect millions of people, whether they are in the county, wherever they are in the county, it's somehow going to affect them. And as you mentioned before, when we were talking earlier, like billions of dollars, right? So to me, it's hard to kind of fathom how one does a project like this. I guess to get started, I wanted to ask you how you arrived at Gehry Partners.
Okay.
Because we all know Frank Gehry, and he's this larger-than-life figure, and these incredibly joyful architecture around the world. How did you come to work on this project?
So when I was in grad school at the GSD, I was there for literally spanning 5 years, but my third year in 2015, Frank had come to Harvard to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Harvard Arts First Festival, which was a separate event from the GSD. And during that event, there was the award ceremony and lots of hoopla. And then after the awards, there was a reception and a dinner. And at the reception, him and his wife were sitting on the couch for a really long time by themselves, which I thought was interesting. And I just kept on circling around. And there was maybe about 15, 20 minutes before dinner started. So I was like, no, let me just sit down and talk to them. And he basically told me, like, you've got, balls, excuse my language, but yeah, for sitting down next to me. And I was like, yeah, like, you're not going to bite me, I'm assuming. So we struck up a conversation, and I talked about how I was studying urban planning and architecture. And I had known about his career at the GSD, in which he was studying urban planning, but had unfortunately dropped out due to financial reasons. And he himself, hasn't had a great relationship with the GSD ever since. And so it was an interesting conversation because I was kind of expressing my own concerns about the program and how I didn't think that architecture education in general was comprehensive enough in the discussion of urbanism. And he asked if I had a pen and paper, and I said, yeah, of course. I have my sketchbook. I gave it to him, and he signed it. I didn't ask for you to sign it, but thank you. And he gave me his assistant's information and phone number and said, do you need a job? And I said, not quite yet. I'm not going to finish for another 1.5 years. And eventually I decided to give them a call, and I applied and got in. And before I actually finished applying, I met with the partner who runs the master plan project on our side. And he gave me a rundown on the river. And at this point, they hadn't actually won the contract for the master plan. And I was like, okay, thanks for giving me this presentation. I was just coming in for my interview. And it was actually really interesting. And so from the very beginning, I knew I was going to work on this project. I do work on other architectural, specific projects, but this is my main source in the office of work. So yeah.
Can I interject a really short anecdote?
Yeah.
When I was at grad school, I randomly sat down at a lunch table when Denise Scott Brown was supposed to be presenting, and my conversation just was about the weather. So for you to be able to pull off your future career through that is nice to hear that somebody can do that.
Well, I think at the time I wasn't all that concerned. I might not seem it right now, but I'm pretty introverted. But when it comes to people who I think I'm never going to meet again, I become like this huge extrovert. And so I just didn't think there were any consequences of me talking to him. And at that time, I lined up a job in Boston. So I thought I was set. My mind was set on staying in Boston, enjoying my little life there. And when he offered, I was like, oh, this is a possibility. And I really ran with it when I came to the realization that at the time he was like 87, he's now 91, and those opportunities may not last forever, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So let's travel to Boston and Cambridge, and let's go back to your time at the GSD. I want to talk a little bit about, what that experience was like, and what was the journey towards, starting a kind of a movement, I feel like, that's had so many positive effects over the years leading up to now.
I will have to say my experience at the GSD, especially my first 2 years, was not great. Before I even started, we had an incoming students lunch at Preston Scott Cohen's house, where a fellow classmate of mine approached me and asked where I went to college. And I said, oh, I went to Princeton. And then he looked me up and down. It was just like, oh, you're gonna need help. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you. Excuse me, I don't know who you are, but thank you. And then my first day of studio, unfortunately, my studio professor, when she came over for my desk crit, said, you're lucky to be here. And affirmative action, affirmative action works for a reason.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, what the heck? What in this 1 week, a lot has been said.
Wow.
And it was really frustrating because I graduated at the top of my class at Princeton, and I know my work was good coming in. And I also sat, on the entire time I was at the GSD, I sat on the diversity committee. And I know for a fact that they were really struggling to actually implement affirmative action in their admissions practice. Mm-hmm. So this woman's telling me, you are the affirmative action kid. And it's like, you guys didn't even look at my race until after I got accepted. So that was really discouraging for me. And I had never felt my race more until I came to the GSD, which was sad because I was 22. And when I got to the school, there was maybe 7 or 8 other Black kids out of 900 within the walls of the GSD. Mm-hmm. And we had just started the previous spring semester, the African American Student Union. And it was literally like a Loeb Fellow and a landscape architecture student. And so that fall semester I joined, we actually started having meetings. Every single person who came became an officer right off the bat. So I was treasurer my first year. And we really decided to focus on admissions within the school and then trying to foster events for us. And so we actually had David Adjei come to speak way before, this is 2012. So before we kind of, I think, blew up in our minds outside of that context. And then in 2013, we did a thing and we wrote a letter to Kanye West, which was not a joke, but not necessarily a serious endeavor, and basically ended the letter saying you should come to the GSD so we can do something dope, with an explicit amount of use.
Some kind of design firm at that time?
I'm sorry?
He had started as a design studio? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the reason that letter was prompted was because he had done a BBC music interview that summer, so I guess summer 2013, and he used the word architecting. And I had done some research and found out that when he was in his first round of college, he actually went to college twice on 2 different occasions. And the first time he actually was looking into studying architecture. And his best friend, Virgil Abloh, who's now one of the creative menswear designers for Louis Vuitton, was it Louis Vuitton? Yeah, Louis Vuitton. He actually studied architecture and structural engineering as an undergrad. And that's kind of where they were overlapping as their friendship and really developing their friendship. And so Kanye has this immense amount of knowledge of architecture that I don't think most people were aware of. And once that letter went through, 3 months later, we get an email from his publicist being he's going to be in Boston on Sunday. You can have 10 people in the room. You have to have Pellegrino and some type of cookie and like Thin Mints for Kim. I'm like, oh, Kim's coming, cool. And we met with them for like 2 hours, and the next thing we know, he's standing in the trays and announces to the entire school, you come to the concert for free, which was fun. And that led us in the dean's office.
Yeah.
And once we caught the attention of the dean and the media, which helped, we started getting an influx of Black applicants. The next year, we went from having like 12 Black students to 25 Black students, and we started getting more funding as an organization. We started then talking about running Black Design, but he's like, oh, before you put on a conference, let's do like a baby event. And once Black Lives Matter really kind of took hold in Boston, and we started to build other events, that's kind of how we got to Black Design. When we initially started the conversations with the dean at the time about Black Design, he's like, oh, you'll need to raise $10,000, 100 people will come. We ended up we oversold our tickets by like 150, which was a little bit of an issue. And then we raised $50,000. So it like blew their expectations out of the water, and I think garnered a lot more respect for the Black students and the other people who were allies within the group therefore after.
Yeah. Wow.
That's
amazing.
Sort of an incredible story. I'm like just very impressed.
However, I don't condone anything Kanye West says at this point. I thought he was crazy then too. So
Yeah.
He's a controversial figure, but
yeah.
I mean, I think that this should be obvious, but it's worth saying that, in this time of crisis, transformation, and uncertainty, and we were talking about this when we chatted before, there's no one monolithic Black experience, right? How have the last 4 months been for you? How have, where are you right now, and how's it been?
Yeah, so on March 12th, my office closed very suddenly. And earlier in that week, I have an underlying immune condition, so I'm at risk. And earlier in that week, I kept emailing my partner being like, I think I need to talk to you. Like, I don't know if I'm feeling comfortable being in the office right now. We sit in a very open environment. Like, people have a tendency not to stay home when they're sick. And then all of a sudden our office just shuts down, and I got on a plane that night and came home to Connecticut, and where I spent the last 3.5 months or so. And then I came to my boyfriend's place in Harlem last week. So that was already kind of tough. And as you guys might know, or should know, hopefully, the coronavirus has definitely disproportionately affected Black and brown people in our immediate family. We've had several cases and deaths in our friends and within our broader spectrum. We've also had several deaths. And so that's been weighing heavy. Having to watch funerals via Facebook is weird and voyeuristic, and it doesn't seem right. Some of the family members who have passed, like the immediate family has opted to hold off on doing a funeral. So those are things that are weighing on our minds already. And then with the week of George Floyd, I actually heard of the Amy Cooper event first before George Floyd, I guess, but the order was reversed. And I watched the Amy Cooper video. I was like, I'm tired. It's already been a month, or 2 months.
I know.
And then after that, I started hearing about the George Floyd video, and I said, I don't need to watch it. I've watched dozens of these videos before. I get it. I know what it's going to be. And then anytime you turned on the news, they were showing clips of it. And so eventually, by virtue of just turning the news on every once in a while, I saw the video. And I think once I finally finished a full 2-minute clip of the video, I just kind of entered a state of numbness, I could say. And maybe it took almost 2 weeks before I felt any emotion other than numbness. I don't want to say this time was different. I don't think it was different for me in terms of the incidents of police brutality, but it was different for me because it was in the context of mass rates of infections and death.
Yeah.
And so that was really difficult. And it was also difficult because I felt like all of my non-Black friends and their mothers were coming to this realization that racism exists. And so I was getting text messages from classmates from high school who had themselves said racist things to me and were apologizing for those things being said. And it's just I live this every day. I don't need to be re-traumatized by things that happened 15 years ago. Thank you very much. I was getting messages from people at the GSD who had never said a word to me, or who told me I was wasting my time doing a planning degree because it meant I was a weak designer. Like a whole litany of responses from people, and it's like, I'm already dealing with everything else that's going on in the world. Like, I don't need your apology. I don't want to hear about like you feeling bad about like yourself or like you feeling you're like a immediate acknowledgement of this racism. Oh my god. And so that like the last like 4 weeks especially were like pretty ugh. In this other fun event, I got called out during a meeting to talk about how I was feeling, and I was the only person of color on the meeting. And it's just like, this is not like this is not how we go about this.
Yeah, yeah. You know, my classmate from the GSD, Kelly Motley, I've been looking at her Instagram stories, and she's a Black woman, and she was basically mocking all of the corporate changes that are happening. And she said, oh, you know, we had a board meeting and we have decided that Black lives matter. And, you know, it's funny, but it's also really sad. And like, I don't know, it's very hard to make sense. It's very hard to kind of cope, I guess, with the condition that this country is in.
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing that. And I know that it requires a lot of energy and, you know, to go there and share that. So I do want to come back to your project and talk a little bit more and ask you some questions about that. But I'm wondering if I can share the other project that we had in mind as kind of a counterpoint or a foil to your project. And I'll go ahead and share my screen and just give a really brief introduction to that. I think that we chose this project because it's just so weird and different. The reasons, I guess, that related to the LA River Master Plan is that there's a river here and it's a project in California. And it's also thinking about public safety, public health, and so forth. So the San Clemente Dam was built in the early 20th century. Here's an image of the construction. And, you know, at that time, these things were these huge technological design and structural engineering like feats. And here's an image of the dam in use. But over the years, it started to collect a lot of sediment. And there were big concerns that it posed a public hazard because the dam might break and, you know, it might hurt the communities downstream. Not to mention that over all these years, it had also affected negatively the ecosystem of the river, including the steelhead trout that would migrate upstream during parts of the year. So in 1991, the conversation began to do something about this. And there were two proposals. One, I think it was around a $40 million project, which was to make it even more robust in order to kind of, you know, barricade it further. But ultimately, the stakeholders decided to go with the more expensive option, which was an $80 million project, which involved completely removing it. And I should give credit to the book that mentions this, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell. And in the last chapter, she kind of uses this as an example, you know, perhaps both a literal and a metaphorical example of how we might begin to think about structures that pose a threat to communities. And so the project took 3 years and a lot of design and engineering work. And even before they could dismantle it, they had to reroute the river so that they could do it safely. So they had to figure out like the alternate, like what would replace it. And then ultimately it was done. And now, you know, finally it's this act of destruction that's also an act of restoration. So that's kind of a brief introduction to this project.
Can I throw out a first question about the LA River project and your role as a kind of like urban planner or at a different scale that we're normally used to? like even when you're recounting your story from the GSD about this like notion that somehow you're a worse designer because you're an urban planner, I think like it definitely exists, right? And I'm curious, like for me, it's something that, you know, I've been having conversations with for years with friends about this, like that there seems to be a disproportionate like attention to those that, and I'm myself like guilty of this, like I'm not great at engaging in you know, political or sort of like broader conversations outside of like aesthetics or like form and stuff like that. But it's also always frustrated me that the students that were suited for that were not given like sort of equal credit.
Yeah.
So I think like this is a kind of like disciplinary critique of mine and others is like how sort of like insular and like narrow-minded the views or like the conversation is. And ultimately what is intriguing about the project is that there is like so much, you're handling so much information, right? That you have to be engaging in other professionals, like individuals in the community groups to consult and like actually design with. And it just like offers a kind of participatory design that I don't think exists in this kind of other more like singular figure driven architecture.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could like talk a bit about like who is involved, like what other professionals are you collaborating with in order to design?
Yeah.
Sorry, that
I just want to insert quickly. I think the reason why when I applied to grad school, I applied for both programs at the same time. And literally in my urban planning application, I think my first sentence was along the lines of, I don't want to be an urban planner, but I need this education. And the reason I applied to planning programs is I grew up in Connecticut in like a very like upper middle class, super white community. My mom is from Newark, New Jersey, which is majority Black and brown, very low income. There's a 1 in 4 lifetime likelihood of going to prison in Newark. And so I would go back and forth on Sundays after church from like my parents' house to my grandparents' house and back and forth every single week. And you could see the erosion of the urban space and buildings and the environment from one space to the next. And you see people like, you think of like the modernist public housing project. It's been not just proliferated in Manhattan, it's everywhere. And so to see an idea that's based off of form and theory be implemented in communities of color, and see how much those ideas failed those communities, I think was one of the reasons why I was like, I want to make sure I'm a responsible architect in the idea that I have to understand the community needs. I need to understand what it values before I can even bother putting pen to paper. So that was the reasoning why I wanted to learn about financing mechanisms. I wanted to learn about how do you actually engage a community? How do you do a survey properly? And so that was important for me in my own practice moving forward. Within the master plan, so that we have the three-part team of the landscape team, architecture, geotechnical / hydraulic engineering, but we also have multiple community groups that we actually subcontract with directly. So River LA, which is a nonprofit that literally just focuses on activities and development along the river, is our main nonprofit organization we work with. And then we have partner events. So one would be, for example, East Yards, which is an environmental justice organization out of South LA. It's predominantly Latinx and indigenous peoples. And they focus a lot typically on the role of the highways in LA County as it both disconnected the communities, but also created this huge issue of pollution burden on those communities of color. We have organizations that we work with that actually help to distribute flyers to other community members. So my favorite two would be the Hollydale Cycling Club, and Hollydale Regional Park is one of the parks that's right along the river in Southgate. And there's a group of cyclists who go from there to Long Beach, which is about a 9-mile bike ride every Sunday at 10 a.m. And everyone just shows up and they just go down the bike. And so what they would do was we give them a huge pack of flyers, they would take it, and they would start distributing it to people in parks and on benches as they would ride their bikes. We also work with the Compton Cowboys, which is, everybody should look it up, and it's awesome. It's a historically Black organization that works with at-risk youth in Compton and the neighboring communities to teach them how to horseback ride and about equestrianism. And they have their own paddocks, and they work to help do sort of like community stabilization and outreach within the community. And they literally would take our flyers on horseback and like distribute them out to people in the community. Yeah. They also like would show up to some of the meetings with their like big cowboy hats. And they called each other like a horse gang. And I mean, Compton, as a lot of people know, is kind of like where a lot of the gangs in LA are located. And so they really try to work as a gang diversion program, especially for young boys that are really at risk of getting poached to be in the gangs.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
But we work with a lot of other types of people too. We have 72 and Sunny as a graphic designer. We think a lot about graphics, so we are actually going to be redesigning all of the signage along all 51 miles to try to unify it and try to determine a shade of blue between the graphics team and 2 design offices and engineers who like don't know color very well. And then you have Frank and Lori Olin sitting at the table. Like, we've had probably 20 discussions about what shade of blue we're going to use. And like, there's palettes of blue all over the office. We're constantly like, it's this blue. And then next week, no, it's this blue. And then someone's like, what about purple? It's like, no, purple, just think of blue.
It's funny that it still comes down to these kind of like weird taste squabbles that seem to exist. So it's not like totally irrelevant what some things that are happening in architecture schools. But do you find the kind of like, do you enjoy engaging in like all of this kind of information, or would you rather be choosing what shade of blue? You know what I mean? Like, what do you enjoy more?
I love the engagement. And I think I knew I was going to love it before I even started it, because I enjoyed doing it when I was in planning school. Mm-hmm. But it, for me, is one of the most satisfying things to like come to a table with community members and actually have really honest conversations about design. Mm-hmm. And my teammate on the project, who I work with it and everything that we do, he comes from a strict architecture background. He went to Yale, and he had never had this experience working with the community before. And he told me one day, he was just like, is it bad if I like the community work better than the actual work? And I think there's something that's just really fulfilling about it, especially because it's basically like a longitudinal study. I mean, at this point, it's probably been like 25, 26 months of working with these very distinct communities and like going back and having these discussions. They're not always easy. Like, people are not always happy. Sometimes we get yelled at. But actually being, especially like the more sensitive communities and the indigenous populations, which some urban planning practices treat indigenous groups as stakeholders, others treat them as municipalities or jurisdictions of their own. That leads to a whole bunch of discussion. But I think it brings life to a project in a way that I haven't seen otherwise. I mean, I don't want to do it nonstop all day, every day, but I like having balance of like going back to my computer, working in CAD and Rhino, like working on renderings, doing mapping exercises, but also spending the time to think like, how is the community, how are they going to digest this information? And like, what is the feedback they're giving me to make improvements in this sort of digital space?
Yeah, I think like we often forget, or I do at least, and not to speak for other architects, but like at school, like there's just like not an emphasis on like people or like humans that like are actually going to be interfacing with the things that we're proposing. Exactly. I think like, and I wonder if that's like because school projects are more abstract and aren't for real clients and aren't for people, right? Like there's just like a level of separation or like abstraction that is added to it that like I think maybe permits this kind of like headiness that is maybe, you know, detrimental.
I mean, I remember in our core program for GSD architecture, we had, I think it was like 4th semester core, is the urban design studio. And at that point, I hadn't started my urban planning program, but I already kind of had a feeling. And I was looking at these projects like, oh my God, this is the death of urbanism. And to me, that's the perfect example of when, like, this is a time to start having these conversations as architects, because I think it's irresponsible of schools to not talk about what it means to interface with people. Mm-hmm. And especially if you are giving a site, an existing site, in an existing community, an existing city, the least you can do is be like, we're going to have like a day of outreach, or talk about what outreach means, or talk about what it means to work with like other agencies in getting the project done. Mm-hmm. So I just think that there's some frustration, and at least from my end, I'm like, I just feel like architects in general are not ready enough to work in those spaces. I mean, you can learn on the job, but I think we should hire those skill sets before we get out there.
Yeah, or to work in like any sort of professional capacity, really. Like, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I feel like the critical conversations that would take place at a place like the GSD would be around like form, especially in the early like architecture studios. Like, what does it mean to subdivide this surface in different ways? Like, how do we stand back and look at that and discuss that? And okay, that's fine. But like you said, like, how do we also critically talk about fundamental problems that exist in the world that we can't be completely removed from, and engage critically with those kinds of questions, right? Like, whether it's the environment, whether it's providing, safe and dignified housing, so on and so forth. Like, that's data. That's a lot of analysis that's waiting to be done. And by not doing it, the field is kind of failing. And it's failing, especially people who maybe don't come from like the most elite backgrounds, right? Because looking back, I'm like, wow, all of the history and theory that I learned, both at Princeton and at the GSD, was a very narrow spectrum of Western, narrative, and the people who wrote the books and then wrote the books about the books, and it just kept going. So that's something to look back and also kind of question, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's talk about the pavilions. You mentioned restrooms, you mentioned activating the master plan, and I'm wondering, how do you navigate that scale? Like, how do you go from 50 something miles to like having a pivot thing every half mile? Like, how do you do it?
One thing I should specify is that the renderings that you see are probably not going to be what's going to be built eventually. Ideally, what's going to happen is that we're going to send out RFQs for a series of different pavilions at different scales. And the idea is that we actually want to work a lot with the different local talent, because there's so much variety and architectural voice in LA County. And so to actually use these as an opportunity for designers to really leverage their voice and like showcase that work. And because these communities often like don't have like capital A architecture. And so we're just trying to provide more of a guideline for what needs to be included in those spaces. Like anything else at that point, and like any articulation of facade or like whatever you want to do for the roof is up to you at that point. But what we have done is our scopes, we have that 2-mile band all the way down to Long Beach. But we also have gone in and identified the right-of-way. So the right-of-way is the fence line on either side of the river that either the Army Corps or the Flood Control District operates within. And so sometimes the right-of-way is 10 feet, sometimes it's 50 feet, and sometimes it's hundreds of feet. And so what we've done is to outline what the right-of-way's constraints are and what's in the right-of-way. And so part of that map that shows like where all those different locations are is literally someone zooming in time and time again, looking at the right-of-way and seeing where can you actually put something like this, and then where has the room to like expand to have like, like a 20, 30, 40,000 square foot building. And so that's really fun, because they're especially in the upper river, the right-of-way might only be 10 feet for 5 or 6 miles. And so that's when we're either going to have to work in doing like actually acquiring parcels or cantilevering the facilities onto the river itself. But the scale jump is interesting. I think when I'm working on the master plan, I normally have my hand in like 4 or 5 pots at a given time. So I have like my homelessness pot, my affordable housing pot. I do a lot on the financing and budgeting of the project, which is like, I'm the architect. Why am I doing the financing? But okay. I do a lot of like visualization, and I help with, we have an entire book of design guidelines, and that's like 500 or 600 pages. And so that's including like tree species and the signage. And so I help with the sort of graphics of that document. And so your head is always in different scales, regardless of the day of the week. And so I think it's just a matter of just like turning on and off based off of like what meeting is next or what's due next. And you just kind of get used to it, honestly. But it's been interesting because the constraint of the land constraint itself is really tight in some spaces. And so trying to identify like, how do I put this 30,000 square foot building in a 10-foot zone? It's kind of awkward at times. Cool.
Mark, any last big question before we move to the lightning round?
Oh, last big question. Okay, we're jumping. Let's think. I mean, we haven't really talked about the relation to the dam, and I'm curious to hear about the like Jenny Odell's book, because I haven't read it, but I watched a little like clip on it, right? And I think like it ties into these questions that we've also been asking about like our futures or our guests' futures as an architect. Like do you want an office? Like, would it be your office? Would your name be on it? Like, what does that mean to be self-promoting?
Yeah.
Like all of these kind of questions are tricky, and I think are like interesting to hear, like if you have a kind of like what's your 5-year plan or something like that.
Okay, I'll speak to the dam quickly first. So I honestly haven't read the book. Of course, you'll have to send me the link. But in terms of like our project versus the dam is like a return to this like bucolic river state, which the people of LA County would love for the LA River to be returned to its original state. But the issue is the channel is fundamentally a flood control channel and was built for a reason. 90% of the time, the channel basically has no water in it. There's maybe a foot of water in this little tiny channel called the low flow.
Yeah.
And that's when like people are watering their cars, their lawns, and there's water going into the channel from the runoff. But literally only 10% of the time is there actually water in the channel itself. And the reason that it was built was because when LA was developing, you started getting all these hard surfaces that was lessening the permeability of the actual groundwater to go into the water reserves. And so the issue being, if you tear out the concrete, you actually need to expand the width of the zone for water to kind of channelize down the river anywhere between 3 times to 7 times wider. So we're talking 7 times wider at a 600-foot area. You're talking about like the largest eminent domain project in modern history. So unfortunately, we can't naturalize the river. And we get a lot of comments about, what about the steelhead trout? There was never steelhead trout in that river. It only had water in it 10 out of 100 times. So the steelhead trout aren't coming back. They're not in there now. And we get a lot of comments just about like the natural ecology. And what we're actually trying to do is build ecology along the paths, along the different facilities and infrastructure. There's one part in like I think around mile 3 or 4 that's actually the largest algae mat in Southern California. So it's a massive bird habitat. And so like we're also understanding there is ecology within a concrete channel itself and respecting that. And with the dam, they could tear it out because people weren't living up to that 10-foot line next to the river. You mean like you don't have the same issues of flood risk and property management and just the vulnerabilities of those communities. And so when the Army Corps did that 3 to 4 mile study and they found out there was a huge chunk of the river that was underserviced, then like what does that mean if you really look at the hydraulics for the entire thing? And so with it already being so sensitive, we want to respect that people already live there. We're not going to take away their homes. We're not going to displace them. Those people deserve to be there as much as anybody else. and we want to respect them, but we also want to figure out solutions that can help increase the flood risk management while providing broader parks and other stuff. And then going to your question about what's next, when I was at the GSD, I actually had a meeting with the previous dean, and he's like, why don't you start an office? And I was like now? He's like, and this was after Black Design, that's when we like proved ourselves. And I was like, I'm not ready for that. Like, I'm like 25, like I don't have any money. I'm like, you're making me broke by coming here. And so that has always been in the back of my mind. And I think the idea, there's a series of women specifically who helped put together Black in Design, who are all different disciplinaries, different disciplines. So urban planning, landscape, architecture, visual arts. And we've talked about it extensively about starting a practice. I won't say when, if, who, but I think it's on the horizon. And actually, and one Latina. So I think the idea is that we could build something for people that look like us, understand the vulnerabilities that they face on a day-to-day basis, but also provide them things that are economical, but then also beautiful and respective of them, respective of the environments that they live in. I look forward to the day that we are ready to do it. We're not quite there yet, but it's coming eventually.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we could move to the lightning round of questions if you're ready.
Yes.
Mark, do you want to?
Is everyone else going to answer too?
Yeah, everyone's supposed to answer. Why am I always doing the lightning round? I feel like a bozo when I do this, but
we can do half and half. So
okay, no, it's fine. I can do it. Okay, so the lightning round, if everybody could have their chat boxes ready, including our large list of participants, long list. So we're gonna give you an either or question, and we'll say them, but other people can chat them or say them as well. You could just put your audio in. Okay, so the first one, and I'll count down to 3. The first one is river or sea? River or sea? Okay, 1, 2, 3. I say sea.
River.
Yeah, you have to say river, right? Wait, I need to open the chats. Was there any?
There's a nice mix.
There's a few C's.
There are a few C's.
There are a few C's. I mean, the sea, I've talked about this with friends before, but the sea is just such a breathtaking, magnificent thing that like any sort of like design near it needs to like compete, which is something that I guess rivers are the same thing. So,
yeah.
Water.
I don't like, I find the ocean just kind of scary.
Me too.
Not to perpetuate stereotypes, but yeah, I don't really do too much in the ocean.
That's fair. The ocean is giant and there's a lot and deep. Okay. All right. So the next one is LA or New York or East. Oh, that's the next one. Okay. LA or New York? LA or New York? 1, 2, 3.
LA.
I don't know.
Everyone's New York.
I'm currently in the Midwest trying to go to one of those 2 places, and I don't know which. So maybe I'll just tally these up, and that'll be my decision.
Oh, that's cheating.
All right, but this is also pretty even.
Wait, Dana, what was yours?
LA. Wait, am I supposed to type 2? I'll type mine.
Whatever.
Okay, the next one is West Side or East Side, which I think like applies to LA, but also to anywhere. So West Side or East Side? All right, 1, 2, 3. I think I say West.
Ooh, a lot of East Sides. Are we talking about East Side New York though? What's East Side for everybody else?
These are very vague. I mean, we haven't had any Say that again?
I would do East Coast, but what, like LA and then West LA.
Yeah, the sunlight just seems brighter there or something. Okay, non sequitur. Dog or cat? Dog or cat? 1, 2, 3. Dog for sure. I can't. Neither.
Cat.
You cat?
I actually foster kittens.
Do you have them with you?
No, but I'll put a picture and I'll show you guys. I also do bottle babies. You have to be certified for. When my boyfriend moved back to the East Coast, this was my project for myself. And they're like 6 weeks old or younger, and they have to be fed every 2 hours. And now I sound like I'm crazy, but I do it on the weekends.
Oh, like you're bottle feeding the kittens?
Yeah. So you literally have to like this is the little baby kitten. You have to like hold it on an angle, and then like the bottle has to like go straight to its stomach, basically. And then you have to like keep them on feeding pads the entire day because they can't regulate their own temperature. They also like don't know how to use the bathroom yet, so you have to like stimulate them to pee because they also can't do that. This one time, I shouldn't say this because I'm being recorded, but this one time I had 3 of them, and 2 of them were in the crate on the table, but I left the door open. I was feeding one of them, and all of a sudden I hear like a little thump, and one of them had fallen off the table. A little bit messed up, I guess. I tried.
You tried.
But they're so small. Like, I don't know. It's not great.
Sounds really delightful, actually. Maybe I'll switch to cats.
It's really fun. Actually, and I don't like adult cats, but I like kittens. So, it's one thing or another.
Okay, next one is rain or sunshine. I'm like reminded of Lady Gaga's most recent song for some reason. Okay, rain or sunshine? 1, 2, 3. I think sunshine.
Sunshine.
Rain.
Well, most people sunshine.
There's a few rains. Does anybody want to explain themselves?
I'll show you some of the cats.
Oh.
No.
Growing up for me, that's really cute. I guess when you come from a really warm place where there's too much sunshine all the time, rain is a nice relief.
Yeah, rain is more atmospheric we have here. That's true.
Yeah.
I don't know. Every time, actually, another anecdote. I went to Los Angeles undergrad. No, Los Angeles. I went to USC in Los Angeles, and every time it rained, my first semester, I fell. It's because it's very slippery, and this probably has directly to do with why there's so much runoff that goes into the LA River.
Yep.
It's like a giant concrete campus, there's like lawns and it's very nicely manicured, but the surfaces are so slippery, so I don't like the rain. Okay. Line. It also like coincided with like studio reviews. Okay, so like carrying a model and like falling and like trying to not drop it.
I also feel like the rain in LA comes down real hard and really fast.
Yeah, it's not great. Okay, line or curve? Is this about line or curve? 1, 2, 3, curve.
Curve. Oh, it's an even mix-ish.
What's the difference? Is line meaning like a straight line versus a curve? Okay.
But I feel like curves give you more potential because a curve can be a line, right?
Yeah, probably.
A rectangle, a square, or whatever.
Semantics here. Okay, architecting or urban planning? Like 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna go with.
What do you like architecting?
Either architecting.
I literally switch depending on the day of the week and what crap I've had to deal with. What random community group.
Nice.
The worst is when a community group tweets about your project. That's great. Not in the
Did you say urban planning?
I said architecting today, but when I talked to you guys earlier in the week, I said planning.
Mm-hmm.
But we were in a little bit of steam with one of our groups. So
Yeah. And Wakas, why did you say urban planning?
I don't know. I've been reading a lot of stuff about Lina Bobardi and how architecture traditionally has been about control and like shutting out things and like really curating how people experience a space. And I feel like urban planning might be a way to get away from that and be a little bit more messy and, you know, like acknowledge the messiness of the world. Which is,
I have to say, the planners at the GSD are like living in their own like universe of like justice and equity and like the real world. That it was really refreshing when I was in that program, and they also value sleep, which was a really good year for me.
that's really important. Yeah, that's really important.
I know. Yeah. What is with so many cultural issues with architecture that like really it's very toxic. It's crazy. Okay. People or nature? People or nature? The classic dichotomy of people or nature. Okay, 1, 2, 3. People. Let's say people. Ooh, we got some nature.
A lot of nature.
Is this like introvert, extrovert? Is that what's coming up here?
Unless you consider people to be part of nature, right?
I guess.
I also think it totally depends on like how you're raised, because I was not raised like outside at all. And I like mentioned going to a national park to my parents, and they were just like, "Why would we do that? There's no point."
I taught up at Cornell for 1 semester last time, and I was like, oh my God, there's like nobody here. And my family's like, well, there's so much like beautiful nature, just go hiking. And that's why I'm very clear I'm a people person. Like, the nature wasn't cutting it. Okay, side note. Okay, the last one is private or public? Private or public? 1, 2, 3, public.
Wow.
Emma says
We're
private.
the only ones. We have 2 at least.
There's some privates.
Yeah.
I guess it could apply to their personal self and whatever. I don't know. I think I'm really not good at being private. I'm an oversharer.
Same.
Yeah, it's caused issues in the past. Hopefully not more. Well, this was fun. I feel like I want to keep talking, but we'll let everybody enjoy the rest of their Sundays. And thank you so much for being so open about, you know, your experience and the project. And we're excited to see what comes of it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you guys, really.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
How do we try to close it? Where is the, oh, there's a leave button. Okay, bye.